today's lesson, we are going to spend some time building fluency with adding and subtracting fractions. We're going to do this by finding the least common denominator and creating equivalent fractions, and then checking to make sure that our work has been simplified. So the first problem that we're going to take a look at is that on page 396, where it says Kayla had 9/10 gallon of paint. She painted the ceilings in her bedroom and her bathroom. How much paint does she have left over after painting the two ceilings? And then in the graphic, it took 2/3 of a gallon for her to paint the ceiling in her bedroom and 1/5 of a gallon to paint the ceiling in her bathroom. So the first thing that we need to look at is we need to look at what we need to find. And so we need to first find the total amount of paint that Kayla had. So Kayla had 2/3 of a gallon plus 1/5 of a gallon. And we need to see what the value is of that. And then we need to subtract that from 9/10 of a gallon. So let me go ahead and make some workspace. So I'm going to do 2/3 of a gallon plus 1/5 of a gallon. And that will tell me how much paint she used. Looking for that least common denominator. So the least common denominator is going to be 15. And so how I found that was I looked for the value. So I would list out my multiples: 3, 6, 9, 12, 15. And I would do the same thing for my 5s until I found one that was in common. And so to go from 2/3 or to equals how many 15s, I'm going to take 3, I'm going to multiply that by 5. So you'll notice that I took out that line of multiplication. If you still need to show that step, you can. But if you're at the point that you can look and just create equivalent fractions, I don't need to see what you multiplied by anymore. And so then I'm going to multiply. 2 times 5 is going to give me 10. And I'm going to do the same thing for the bottom. 5 times 3 is going to give me 15. So 1 times 3 is going to give me 15. So 1 times 3 is going to be 3. And then I add them together and I end up with 13 15ths. And so now my next step is going to be to figure out how much of a paint I have left. So I need to take the 13 15ths and I need to subtract that from 9/10. So create some workspace here. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to set up my problem. So I'm going to do 9/10. And I'm starting with 9/10. I'm not sure that actually I know it's a bigger piece because tenths are smaller than 15, so it's a larger size fraction. And then I also know that I'm going to use 9/10 as the number I'm subtracting from because that's the total amount of paint that I had started. So I'm going to list out multiples. So when I list out my multiples, I'm going to do them over here. I'm going to stick with blue. So I have 10, 20, 30, 40. Stop there. I have 15, 30. There's my multiple that I have in common, so I can stop. So 13 15ths. To get that, I multiply 15 times 2. So 13 times 2 is going to be 26. And then to equal 30ths, I multiply 10 times 3. So 1, 2, 3. So it's going to be 9 times 3, which is 27. Subtract my numerators, and I'm left with 1/30th as my answer. So I know that this answer is going to be in lowest terms or simplified already because I have 1/30th as my lowest value. It's a unit fraction. Okay. So how could we check to see that this answer is reasonable? So one of the things that we could do is we could round these values. So 27/30ths, I would round to 1. 26/30ths, I would round to 1 and subtract, and I should have an answer near 0. 1/30th is near 0, so it's a reasonable answer. Okay, moving into your guided practice, it says in the example on page 396, how much more paint did Kaya use to paint her bedroom ceiling than her bathroom ceiling? So now instead of adding 2/3 and 1/5, we're going to subtract 2/3 and 1/5 as I write the addition symbol. We're going to be subtracting to find the difference. So when it says how much more paint, that's a key word there that I'm going to be subtracting. So I go ahead, I know that if we recall 2/3, the common denominator was 15. 1/5 is going to be a 15. Here it's going to be 3/15. Here it's going to be 10/15. And then I'm going to subtract 10 and 3. 10 subtract 3 is going to be 7/15. And I don't have a common factor I can divide 7 and 15 by. So 7/15 is my simplest form. All right, take a look at problem number 2. Kevin estimated the difference of 9/10, subtract 4/8 to be 0. So is his estimate reasonable? And explain. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to estimate ourselves. So we would say that 9/10 is approximately equal to 1. 4/8 is approximately equal to 1/2. 1 subtract 1/2 would be 1/2. So his answer is not reasonable because 0 is too small of a value, because 4/8 is close to 1/2. 9/10 is close to 1. So his answer is not a reasonable answer. All right, so let's take a look at some of our practice problems. So we have 1/15 added to 1/6. So when I go ahead and add those together, I need to find the least common denominator. So again, if I list out my multiples, 15, 30, 45, I'm going to stop there. And then I'm going to do 6, 12, 18, 24, 30. Common denominator is going to be 30. And so 15 times 2 is going to get me to 30. So this will be equal to 2/30. And then 1/6 times 5 gets me to 30th. So this would be equal to 5/30. Can add those together. 5 plus 2 is going to be 7/30. 7 and 30 don't have common factors. So that is already in simplest form. All right, the next problem that we're going to take a look at is 7/16 subtract 1/4. And so when we take a look at 7/16 and subtract 1/4, first thing I need to do is list out multiples. So I'm going to list out multiples of 4. So 4, 8, 12, 16. There's my least common denominator. So I don't even need to touch the 7/16. It stays the same. And then I figure out, what did I multiply 4 by to get to 16? 4 multiplied by 16, 4 times 4. So it's going to be 1 times 4, and I'm left with 4. 7 subtract 4, I end up with 3/16. And 3/16 has already in simplest form, so my answer does not need to be simplified. 3 and 16, greatest common factor is going to be 1. All right, when we take a look at our next problem, I have 7/8 subtract 3/6. Notice that it was written horizontal. I'm going to go ahead and write it vertical. My suggestion would be to do the same, so that way you have your work to do your equivalent fractions. It's also going to be very nice when we start working with mixed numbers in a few lessons to have that already familiarity with the vertical. So list out multiples of 6. So 6, 12, 18, 24. List out multiples of 8, 8, 16, 24. Notice that 24 is what I have in common, so I can go ahead and stop. 7/8 is going to be equal to 21/24 because I multiply 8 and 7 by 3. So again, whatever I do to the denominator, I have to do the numerator. And then 6 to get to 24, I'm going to multiply that by 4. And so 3 times 4 is going to be 12. And then I do 21 subtract 12. And when I do 21 subtract 12, I end up with 9/24. And then I look and see, do 9/24 have a common factor? And the answer is going to be yes. The common factor that they have is 3. And so here's how I can do this. I recognize that 9 is a multiple of 3, and 3, I'm going to show you guys a little trick, a divisibility rule to check by, is if I add the digits together. So if I add 2 plus 4, I get 6. 6 is a multiple of 3, which means 24 is divisible by 3. So by adding the digits together and then seeing if it's a multiple of 3, I can check and see if it's divisible by 3. It is. So when I divide by 3, I end up with 3 eighths as my answer. The last problem that we're going to take a look at together is going to be number 6, which is 7/8 added to 4/8 subtract 2/4. Now, if you've not seen parentheses in a math problem before, it is the start of what we call order of operations. And with order of operations, the parentheses tell us that we do this set of problems first. So we're not going to add 7/8 to 4/8. We're going to subtract 4/8, subtract 2/4, and then we'll see what's left over when we do that. So when I set this up, I'm going to go ahead and set it up vertically. So I have 4/8, subtract 2/4. And what I look for is I look to see what they have in common. So I list out their multiples. So 4, 8, that right there. So 4/8 is going to stay the same. And then 2/4, I'm going to multiply that by 2. And when I multiply that by 2, I get 4/8. 4/8 subtract 4/8 is 0. And then I add 0 to 7/8. And when I add 0 to 7/8, I get 7/8. So my answer here is going to be 7/8. So again, when I have problems that have parentheses first, I do the operations inside the parentheses first, and then I do the operation outside of the parentheses. In practice, you're going to do 7 through 10 all. So you're going to do the first 4 problems that are written vertically for you. Problem 17, and then 19 through 23 all. And then 23 is your first problem on your math practices and problem solving. And then I would like for you to do problems 28 and 29 on the back side as well.